All right, first of all, is there anything particular you wanted to know about airbrushing? I'm sure, I mean, all you guys mostly are using airbrush in one form or another. Painting your models, airplanes and tanks, but I'm going to concentrate on, as it pertains to kind of what I do, which is painting flesh, and not only just monster flesh, but flesh in general, and kind of the basics of how I kind of get my technique going. And I'll cover a few real quick of what I use and why I use it. First of all, the main brush I've been using lately has been this Grex with the trigger. I injured my finger about 2 years ago, and it's been real hard for me to use the traditional top trigger, pushing down. I had no feeling in this finger up in this part of my hand, so over time when I was airbrushing, it started affecting the way I paint. So when I talked to the Grex guy at the show, I was kind of against this at first. I didn't really think this was I didn't really think much about it. And I started using it, and it really helps me because I can use this finger, this finger, this finger, and it has a lot more control than what I thought it did, and it's a good brush. So this is the one I'll be using. And I use this compressor, but any compressor will do. I have this 3 outlet going into the port here, and that's what I use mainly 3 airbrushes when I paint. All right, I already got this one primed in the flesh color, but you can prime it in anything you want. I did this flesh because I'm going to be covering flesh, but if you do a zombie, you could paint in a white primer or a black primer or a gray primer. And I always use my primer most of the time as the basis for what I build on, because I do many layers of transparent paint mostly. I thin my paints mainly with 91% alcohol. I use a cleaner, it's called Power Dissolver, and it takes caked up acrylic paint off of almost anything, especially out of an airbrush. I have an old toothbrush that I use. I dip it in some alcohol, just kind of set it aside. I'll show you what that is here in a minute. I use this Minwax wood sheen stain. This is what Josh told me about a while back, to go in a little later and accent some detail work. I kind of do that as I go along. I use an airbrush medium, golden airbrush medium, in general for general airbrush paints to thin them. It thins the paint and makes it spray better without building up on the tip, but it doesn't do away with how the paint is going to react. It doesn't break all the pigment down. It keeps the pigment in there. It just separates it. This is airbrush transparent extender, mainly for the transparent paints. Freakflex. If you've ever heard of Freakflex, it's a hard paint to deal with. It really is, especially when you airbrush. There's a guy out there named David Fisher. He's a great airbrush guy, and his videos, they're great. But he gets this and he just pours it in the airbrush and he just starts airbrushing away. And when you do that, you airbrush away for about 5 seconds, and it's like your airbrush locks up because it dries on the tip. And it's very frustrating. And a lot of people don't even use Freakflex with this, but I found out through a friend, if you use Future Floral Wax and you mix it a bit with this Freakflex, it really sprays like a dream. I mean, you still have to worry about the tip, and you still have to clean your tip off of your airbrush, but this Future Floral Wax works a lot better than their Badger extender, which me and Josh know about how that can react. It can sponge up if you have any residue in your brush, say from Windex or any other thing. It can react in a bad way. I use Freestyle ready-made airbrush paint. I mainly use golden airbrush paint and Calm Art, which is made by Awada, and this is just an airbrush paint, golden. Like I said, I mainly use transparent paints to build up on layers. So what I start doing, first of all, is you have to vision flesh in stages, and you kind of have to go from the bottom out when you're doing like a lot of big figures. And you can do this. This doesn't just apply to monsters. This applies to military subjects in general, just flesh in general. When you get down into the smaller scales, of course, the use of the airbrush is going to start limiting you on what you can do. But you can still do basic highlighting and shadowing, you know, the pre-highlighting, pre-shadowing, and then you can build up on that. But you can take what Ron has done, I'm sure, with mainly an airbrush, and you can see how he's got most of his colors already laid in with an airbrush, and the airbrush makes it real soft and real organic, and that's why I love using the airbrush. I used to be strictly a brush painter and I used oil paints for almost everything until I got introduced to the airbrush. So what I start out doing is I get some alcohol, spray it in my airbrush. And I'm usually a complete mess when I'm done painting because I spray on my hands, spray on my clothes. That's where I bought my Western Sizzling apron. And I usually wear latex gloves when I get to a point where I'm going to have to start handling the model a lot because the paint can start coming off. Anyway, this is alcohol, so I might get a little dizzy, but it won't harm me. I spray in some alcohol to get the parts all looped up in there and kind of any residue that's been built up in there, and I spray it out. Since this is a little devil sculpture, this is a little cheap thing. If this is kind of going to be a flesh color, more of a human flesh, and I've already started out with the base coat of a fleshy, I'm going to start speckling some paint with probably with some red at first, maybe some natural flesh. This stuff's called natural flesh, and I'll start speckling some raw umber, maybe some blues, blue here, and some purple. Here's some Payne's Gray, definitely. And this is a red violet, which is basically a purple, and some red a little later on. Anyway, I'll go ahead and start. What's cool about this airbrush is you can take this tip off, which most airbrushes you can do this. It exposes the needle, which is dangerous. But you can take this part of the back of it off, which is it's magnetized. I guess that's what it is. Magnetized. And then you can put this tip on here, which still protects it, but you can see your needle. And you can see where you're going. I like to see where my needle is. With my Iwatas, I take the tip off. The bare tip's exposed, which is dangerous, like I said, because any little boop and you're going to hit that needle tip and you're done, which I still paint with them, but anyway. So with this, it gives us some good protection, and you can see the needle too. And this just goes on, fits on the back like this right there. So that's what I like about that. Doesn't take much when you paint with transparent paints and you paint the way I paint, because see, that's a lot right there. So I turn down my air pressure. This is like a matte valve, I don't know why. You have to play around with it to get it to splatter, speckle, whatever you want to call it. So just bear with me here. It takes a little bit.
I dropped my water. The brass tip the needle comes out of. The large piece where the tip screws into.
Okay.
I was cleaning.
You might have to get closer if you really want to see what's going on, because it's transparent, yeah. And what you want to do is you want to build this up in very light successive layers, which is why it takes me forever to do a figure. Still getting used to this brush when it comes to this kind of stuff. So. start out and just start speckling. Generally, when you first start doing it, you're like, oh my gosh, that looks absolutely horrible. Which it does. It looks like it has a disease. So you just start spackling all over the place. This is by far not going to be finished by the time I'm done. I just wanted to show you some of the techniques that I use to do this. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.
How did you get so great?
Huh?
I said, how did you get so great?
Wish I
Throwing
was
away
great.
on those.
Wish I was great. I've been painting this way and these monsters and stuff since shortly after I joined the club here. I used to strictly paint just strictly military, and it was mainly medieval stuff like that. And then I would do I love to do Vietnam era stuff. World War II I kind of stayed away from because I always thought it was kind of boring, the uniforms and everything. Not that Vietnam is any funner, but it comes to uniforms. I just like the period better. But I painted a few larger scale military figures for some clients with this, and it worked out just great. And they were 1/10 scale. And that's pretty big, but still it's smaller than this. I know all you guys know about scales. Anyway, so you got all this. Looks speckled, looks horrible. So when you speckle it there, you kind of have some left over, and that's what you want. You kind of open it up a little bit. You want to thin it a little bit more. That much.
Especially there's some paper towels there for you.
See, there's a light layer of paint, just very light, and that's what we want. Then you're going to go over and you're going to spray over it just lightly. What this is doing, this is tying in the areas that you've already splattered into the flesh that's already on there. It's kind of smoothing it out. And the good thing about using alcohol with these paints is it kind of does what Dull Coat does when you spray pastels. It'll soften up pastels. Sometimes they make it disappear, but it'll soften up pastels. And this is kind of what it's doing. It's kind of re-wetting that paint underneath, or the paint that you sprayed on there, and it's kind of softening up the edges as you go along. That's what the alcohol's doing. That's why I like using the alcohol. This is a 91%. Yeah, 91% alcohol.
Is there anything magic about 91%?
Because it has a more alcohol content.
Is it ethanol?
It's isopropyl.
Isopropanol, like rubbing alcohol?
Like rubbing alcohol.
Can I use it straight out of the bottle?
Sure,
91%.
yeah.
So have you ever used vodka?
No.
Don't waste it.
I use my wild
Unless
turkey
it's
sauce. I'm just
grape juice.
kidding. I don't need it. So okay, we got this natural flesh. It kind of looks orangey when you put it on. So we got that, and we'll do a little bit of a raw umber. And I'm using these colors because if you got the basis of a flesh color, it's what usually raw umber. It's got a little bit of red. It's got some. This is mine. Payne's gray. It's got some blue. It's got some purple. Got some raw sienna. And some white. Those are the basics of the flesh colors that I normally use no matter what. But I'm going to go ahead and use some golden raw umber hue. This is transparent, of course. I'm very guilty about not cleaning my brush in between colors. Let me do that. Sometimes if you listen to an airbrush, and you hear a little crackling, that means there's still paint residue left in there. So you may want to spray it again. And you can do a backflow, which I'm sure you guys know about backflows. That's how I mix a lot of my paints in here too, hit with the backflow.
Is that how you mix your dirt?
Huh?
Is that how you mix your dirt too? A little bit of water?
No, that's in the bathtub.
But that's where the bubbles come from.
Yeah. Ew.
And you wonder
They
why,
told me to keep it clean.
What was that wrong?
I said, you wonder why we look at you funny.
No.
A little more alcohol. Bring it down. Like I said, I shouldn't have removed that, but like I said, I used backflow as a way to mix up my paint in there. A little bit. That's not a tip I invented, that's a tip I've learned from David Fisher. And yes, it is kind of a pain to go back and try to figure out where you were. And it usually doesn't take me as long, but like I said, I haven't been using this Grex a whole lot, but
That GMAC makes it convenient though.
oh man, yeah, because before, you know, I was constantly going down here with the pressure meter down there. And if you want, you can make these speckles bigger to do like a freckle or a mole. See, that's a little bigger. And a lot of guys who paint predators do that. They'll get it down and they'll like this, and they'll speckle down over the skin because predator has that reptilian kind of skin, like frogs or lizards or something like that. But all right, there we go. So we've got this and just speckle along. Ken, I think you used this technique on your zombie, didn't you?
I did, but I didn't use airbrush to do it.
Oh, you used the.
I used it flicking with the paintbrush.
See, and that's another way to do it, of course.
I'm gonna try this though, because this looks, if nothing else, a whole lot neater.
It's neater, and man,
Because it makes an unholy mess to do it with paintbrush.
and I tried that, and it was like
And you got no control over really.
no
where it goes.
control. And here, just a second.
Definitely.
So the lower the pressure, the bigger the droplets are.
Yeah, what you want to do is you want to kind of open up the back of your airbrush. You want to play with the air control and turn it down all the way, turn it down all the way, and then you press your, because what you're doing is you're building up the paint on the needle, and then when you release it, the air is pushing it out. So you're turning the pressure all the way down, and then you're pushing the needle, and then you're starting to gauge little by little how much you want to come out. This is smaller speckles. Like I said, if you want more, the bigger ones, you open it up a little bit more, and they'll start getting bigger and bigger and bigger until when you open it up so much, it just starts painting, just a smooth pattern.
That's the thing with that new Grex is it has that ability to do it that I've never been able to do on any other airbrush. I either it's speckling because I don't want it to, you know.
Yeah.
This new Grex thing has that ability when you turn it with you can control the pressure at the airbrush like he's doing, and you get it down to where when you just spray it splatter, it'll do the splatter, and as soon as you let off, it lets off.
That's right. You know, you can do that with an Iwata, but the Iwata is pretty temperamental. Like their MAC valve system is pretty temperamental, like you said. And sometimes it'll, like, see, the paint's getting a little thicker in there, and I've turned down the MAC, and now it's coming out. It was coming out in bigger ones. So I'll turn it back down. Anyway, like I said, it's looking like a mess right now. And another thing you can concentrate on now is around the eye sockets and underneath the cheeks, underneath the chin, kind of where it's shaded. You can kind of start speckling a little more in those areas. Darken those up in there. In the ear. like I said, this just looks like a mess right now, but I'm telling you, if you got the patience, and everyone here does.
Except for Darius. Where you go? Oh, no,
Except for
you.
Derek. Can't sit still, yeah. If you got the patience, by the time you get toward the end, you're going to start seeing this flesh start looking organic. And I think we were talking about that one time a while back about how flesh is very organic and it's not just solid color. You got to make up the colors kind of as the flesh is. Now I'm going to open it up again, send it back down.
The zombie that I did my speckling with primary colors, red, yellow, blue,
Yeah.
and green.
You can do
And then
that.
put flesh over the top of it. And you can't even tell that it was primary colors.
And that's the thing with colors too. You can never go wrong. Who did an article on the Scratching Post about that? With the complementary colors. Tom, I don't know that. You can never go wrong with complementary colors, shading or highlighting, because all colors come from the basic colors, and all those complementary colors come from those colors. So they're called complementary colors because they're harmonious with the color that they come from. Now, as you can already kind of tell, if you could, see it, they're already starting to blend. The orangish color underneath there is blended in with the orange overspray that I did. The raw umber is starting to blend in with the speckled raw umber, and this alcohol has gotten on these layers, and it's starting to make these layers coincide with each other. So, open this back up. Just whispering, but I don't care. Just keep going. A little blue on here. After this blue, I'm going to quit the speckling, and then I'm going to start doing what they call modeling, which you guys know what modeling is. I'm sure if you don't, just ask me and I'll explain it to you. You guys that paint what? German aircrafts, fighters, they have modeling on there. Modeling is a good tool. This is a good tool. I never use one technique on a figure because it takes to me a bunch of techniques. This is a really powerful color. This green shade, phthalo blue, is that how you say it? Phthalo blue? Okay. Phthalo blue, okay. That's a very, very powerful color. And when I oil paint it, you have to just use just a little dab will do.
What do you mean by transparent paint?
Transparent means that they've already pretty much diluted the paint to a point to where, see how this is pretty clear? This one isn't so much transparent. Transparent paint means they've already diluted it down to, in essence, it's transparent. The pigment's still there, but the paint medium has been mostly removed, and it's just a lot of this kind of medium here. You can look at it with the pigment. So there's not a lot of carrier left in it from the original paint.
What a transparent paint will do is it will influence colors, but it won't be the color.
Yeah.
So, because you can see through it, all you're really doing is influencing the colors you're putting it on and putting it over it. Whereas if you want to paint a car or you want to paint the tank or something, you're using opaque colors. The colors you can't see.
And the reason I use
That's
Yeah.
how you do it. You dilute it all.
And the reason I use transparent paints because it allows you to build up these many, many layers on top of each other without covering your underlying layers.
So they blend better.
Exactly, so they blend. And what you got to understand too, and realize when you start, if you do start painting like this, is the bottom color is going to influence the top color. So if you're painting a bottom color, you got to think about, okay, if I paint this yellow, if I'm doing yellow, and I paint over that with the purple, you got to realize that the purple is going to influence that yellow. That's why painting with complementary colors is really good.
So essentially what you're doing is you're mixing the paint on the model.
Pretty much mixing the paint on the model. You're mixing the layers.
Right.
Each layer is influencing the other layer, and that's what you kind of got to keep in mind. Because this looks like this isn't gosh, he's not even planning this out, but you really do got to plan it out, because if you don't, you're going to get very frustrated by the time you're on your 5th or 6th layer and it's not turning out like you think, because the other layers have influenced the top layer that's right. Okay, I've really thinned this blue out because, like I said, it's really strong. And even though I thinned it way out, when I spray it on here, you can, even though it's going on top of that darker color, you can tell right away that there's some blue on there. Now already, this layer underneath is influencing this blue. It's turning it into a grayish color. But I already knew that when I put the raw umber on there, that this blue was going to do that. So you got to keep in mind on what you're painting. Are you painting a zombie, which is good? Are you painting a human? Maybe not.
How do you deal with a run? You just don't have, you prevent them basically, huh?
You mean when you spray on something and it runs
Starts to
off?
run, starts to drip, or
Either your paint is too thin, your pressure is too high, or that's mainly the main problems. Is the paint's too thin or the pressure is too high, or you're squeezing too hard.
my airbrush does not have a regulator on the handle like yours does.
Okay.
It's strictly done with the compressor there.
Yeah, you might want to turn down your pressure.
What would you suggest?
I would probably turn down the best thing to test your paint on is not this, is those poster signs. Because that's what you're painting on, plastic, right? You're painting plastic or you're painting resin. It really doesn't matter. There's a practice on that, because that's what you're painting on. And if you spray on it, if you spray it and it runs, well, you gotta think it's running because the paint is too thin or the pressure is too high. So what you might want to do is add a little more paint to what's already in there, and maybe turn your pressure a little down, and then spray it on the plastic and see if you still have that running, spidering. Is kind of the same thing. What it's doing is when it hits that surface, it's hitting that surface and it's not allowing any pigment to grab hold of that surface. It's just running right off of it. And if you guys got anything to share about that, go right ahead.
Probably your pressure needs to be around 10 psi, maybe even a little less. Like you said, your consistency depends on what kind of paint you're using, but I always kind of use, you want your consistency to be like milk. Okay? Whole milk, skim milk, I mean, but that's the thing, if you've got too much thinner, or whatever you're thinking your thing, whether it be alcohol or lacquer or whatever, if it's too much, it's not biting, and that pigment doesn't have a chance to bite because it's just thin way too much. And if you're spraying like with cans, you can get runs if you just, if you're using a rattle can, and you spray too much, now you got too much of that.
I spray it, I keep that on 15 to 20 psi, but I have a knack. So, like you said, consistency of milk, and that takes a little practice, because I've actually got a little milk in a little cup once and kind of compared my paint to it, because I was having trouble. What's the consistency of milk? Because skim milk, 1%, 2%, it's all different. And sometimes when you think your paint is as thin as 2% or the same consistency, and you go to spray it, it's just really either too thick or it's too thin. It really is just a matter of practicing. What I would suggest you do, honestly, is get a piece of plastic material, poster board, and I would just practice. And I would this may sound a little technical, but I was logged in. I had this much paint, this pressure, and I sprayed, and this is what it is. Because that is going to help. You don't have to practice on a model. I would suggest not practicing on a model to get good at airbrushing. I would practice on those pieces of plastic on old models and just practice until you felt really comfortable. Because since you don't have this valve back here, or this micrometer, do you have this back here on your airbrush? Okay, you do that. Okay, what kind of airbrush do you have?
It's a Badger.
It's a Badger. What kind of, you know,
It's a 155, I think, so I'm not sure if it has a back.
Okay, I don't think that has a valve. It's got a micrometer. I don't think yours has that. And it doesn't have the mount valve. So in essence, what you're doing is everything, you're having to deal with total control with your pressure, your paint, and your heat. Because you don't have the luxury of having this to where I can tune this all the way down, not going any further than what I have it tuned down to. You're really having to concentrate on the fine tuning of the air and the paint at the same time, the viscosity of the paint and the pressure. So honestly, that's what I would suggest, is to really practice on some surfaces that replicate what you're painting. If that makes any sense to you.
Realize also the type of paint you're using is going to make a huge difference. You know, if you're shooting glossy type paints, whether it be glossy enamels or whatnot, they're going to react differently than flats. You know, one of the biggest problems that took me forever to figure out is like you're shooting flats on like a military aircraft or something, and you're shooting these flat paint. Some of like the Model Master stuff, if your pressure is a little high, I kept having problems with the paint getting real powdery. You know, I spray it, and I'm like, why? And it's got a little, like, very, very rough finish. I'm like, why is this happening? And finally talked to somebody around the thing, and what didn't realize, particularly I was finding it like in the wings and the joint lines and stuff. What's happening is if you got too much pressure, the paint's hitting and it's getting turbulent flow, and then the paint is drying before it even has a chance to hit the plastic. And so you get this buildup of just black powder, and it can screw things up. So that took a thing of, back off on thin the paint a little more, back off on the pressure, and I didn't have that problem.
And you can hit joints like that at a different angle.
Yeah, you
Come at them
don't
from the
want
front
to hit
or
at a
back.
90-degree angle. You start practicing. Like you said, it's all about practice, practice, practice. I can remember about the first time I airbrushed thing, I was a teenager, 12, 13, and I just about threw the thing away because it just was so crappy. But 30 some odd years later, I'm still figuring it out. So.
Well, and just about every modeler is guilty of not practicing until they have their newest, shiniest thing in front of them to paint on.
And it may be, and you might not have done something for 6 months, a year, or even longer, and you get out there and think, I know what I'm doing, and you get there and go, well, that was crap. And you got to teach yourself to relearn all over again.
All right, now what I'm going to do is what they call modeling. This can either, for me, take place at the beginning, or it can take place in the middle, or toward the end. Modeling is just a way of breaking up the surface tension of the flesh. So is the speckling, spotting, whatever, is to break the surface tension of the flesh. And that's what you got to do, either by speckling, modeling, sponging with a sponge, which I'm not going to cover here because it's mainly an airbrush. Sponging, you can either dry brush, all of this combined together toward the end. Now, I've gotten to where I've gotten a little crazy, and in the end I'm like, well, that looks like a convoluted mess. But you just kind of got to fine tune it as you go along. This is where this is going to come into play with me. Usually when you're speckling, the paint's pretty thin and you don't have to worry about tip dry. But usually I'm not thinning out the paint as much when I'm starting to model. So I just wet the tip of this toothbrush and I kind of rake it across the tip of my brush here, and that keeps it from getting so much of a dry tip on it. So I get pretty close to the model. So this is where I want to see my tip. And I just start doing a noodle or a figure eight. And this is really, really dark because I want it to show up for you guys. And this is really a good way to start breaking up the skin area and start getting that kind of that veiny, mushy look to the skin. If you can elaborate on the skin, go ahead. 'Cause sometimes the terms I use may not be.
Well, I mean, the whole concept of what you're doing is, I mean, if you look at it, his skin, you look at all our skin and stuff like that, it is not monochromatic. I mean, we all have freckles, and that's what this splattering and all that is kind of like making really different color shades of freckles on it. Now he's kind of coming back with this modeling, makes it look like, you know, veins and things like that. So, and of course, with doing monsters and fantasy stuff, you really kind of over exaggerate.
Yeah.
But skin just isn't. There's so many colors and freckles and things like that that's why it's so difficult to recreate with paint, because when you see a photograph of somebody, I can remember when I worked in advertising, we used to get photos for like Dillard's, and we'd have to Photoshop and stuff. And I can remember this one model that had done lingerie work. Great job to have. But when they came in, she was very freckled, and when they took the photos, and the ad department from Dillard said, you know, change some things here, but get rid of freckles. Okay, well, we went in and for almost a week kept going back and forth trying to Photoshop out the freckles and doing all that, and then finally gave up and said, forget about it. It looked unreal. You know, when they started trying to make it, it looks weird. You know, so, and that's what he's trying to do here, is make this look, you know.
All right, now what I'm doing, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
Like you said, I'm just breaking it up, and this isn't so much replicating veining. I am replicating veining, but I'm going to start doing some pronounced veining later on. And like I heard you say, blemishes, that's kind of what I'm doing now, is creating some blemishes. With this, and I'm going to pass this around. Mainly look at the back, because that's where I've been on the back. Dilute this paint. Now I'm going to dilute the paint that I've been spraying on there. How much time do I have?
How long is it going to take you?
Well, I don't want to.
You're at 40 minutes right now.
How much?
You're at 40 minutes right now.
Okay.
But I mean, whatever. These guys will start wandering out whenever they
Yeah,
get
I
tired.
know. I'm keeping my eye on Darius right there.
Right, well, Darius has already went and wandered
Darius' eyes
around. He's
start
back.
going.
I had to go do my thing back there.
Yeah, he's back now.
But when I start seeing Darius' eyes start going like this,
This is the same.
No, all of this stuff right here is completely and utterly applicable to everything, no matter what it is. Even cars, because by the way, cars get dirty, FYI. And this can be done with dirt tones as well as it can be anything else.
Where's Ron?
He's back behind you. Him and his beard.
I don't know if Ron done this with his model. He may have not. It looked like he'd done some of it with that.
What did I do with what?
I don't know if you've done some of the techniques I'm using. Since you hadn't been
Yeah, I'm gonna speckle you.
A little bit, not much.
okay, we'll do
I put a few, I used a toothbrush to do it.
yeah. So what I'll do after I get that laid in, I'll go and spray over again with a very light coat of the same color over that. And now you kind of got to set back and analyze where you're at. Okay, now I'm like, that flesh is looking a little too dark, maybe a little too mushy. So now I need to go back and I need to tie in those colors a little bit with what they call a wash. What we call a wash is a little bit different than what you guys would probably call a wash. I say you guys who do the airplanes and the cars or the tanks or whatever. What we call a wash is very, very diluted paint that goes spray.
Yeah, that's what we call a filter.
Kind of what a filter is then with you guys.
Or what Tom calls a veil, which is a really stupid name for it, by the way.
Are you over in the Middle East?
Just saying. But yeah, Phil,
Okay, what this is some pre-mixed paint. It's Basic Flesh. This was Liquitex paint, and I used to use that when I first started out painting these guys. Just Liquitex, you know, comes in the tubes. That's awesome paint. That's great paint to airbrush with. This is the airbrush medium that is for Liquitex, and you can thin that down and make that just spray just as well as these Comart Freestyle, these Goldens and everything.
and it's cheap.
And it's cheap. And it's, like I said, really good. It's just, it's not ready airbrush, so you have to mix it. But I'm sure most of you guys here, if you've been on hobby any at the time, you're mixing your own paint anyway. Oh, okay. Did they throw that down already? Like I said, this isn't going to be a completed model at the end, but just introducing you to a few of the techniques that can enhance your painting.
And this is all applicable to a lot of other things.
This is all applicable to a lot of other things.
I did speckling on that tarp right there. I did speckling on the
Yeah.
tarp to add, to break up the.
Like I said, I'm not going over a lot of that stuff only because concentrating on flesh, but like you said, it can be applied to anything. So I'm going to go over, I'm going to just try to tie all this in. A lot of this that I've done today is really, to me, too pigmented right now. But I'm needing to do it so you guys can see the technique I'm using. When I usually paint a model, you're like, you haven't even done anything to it. But that's the trick. It has to be so minute. There's a little transition at a time. Little transition at a time. Sort of blends in the layers. Now, if you go through and you spray on this dull coat, which I do use, I get to a point to where I'm like, I don't want any more blending of the alcohol. I don't want any more interference with anything. I spray a layer of dull coat or flat coat. I use dull coat because it's pretty sturdy, as we all know. Spray it, get my hair dryer, shoot it, because I'm impatient, and then I go on to the next step. So like I said, now I've got to a point, now I got to analyze where I'm at. If I was doing this model, just be painting a model for a contest or a client or whatever, I'm like, I'm starting over because I already screwed up. It's already too dark to me. But what I do at this period now is I go back to my Basic Flesh, which this is pretty close to this. So I'm going to use this as a flesh wash. What this is going to do, once I got to a point to where I think I got enough modeling, and I can't tell you when that is because you're going to have to play and experiment with that, and enough, the splatter and all that stuff where I think it's time for me to tie all this together. So that's what I'm going to do now. And Liquitex paint is very safe because it doesn't interfere with Windex, because I know some guys use Windex, and that's dangerous stuff. And so is the windshield washer solution, which I used to use that exclusively, and I found out that is some very nasty stuff, health-wise. So I just went strictly to 91%, and it doesn't interfere with alcohol. It's a pretty hard paint, and it's pretty darn messy too. This blue, like I said, is pretty powerful, so I'm going to need to try to get a lot of that out of here. Now, I'm sure you guys take care of your airbrushes a lot better than I do, or can do.
Right.
Because I don't know if you guys, I'll paint and I'll get busy and go somewhere and I'll come back and I'm like, oh, great, now I've got to just break my airbrush completely.
That's why I use carburetor cleaner to clean mine out.
Yeah,
It cuts everything.
I use Dot 3 brake fluid.
Yeah, it cuts anything.
And it cuts anything. But as far as acrylics go, this power dissolver, did you ever get into that I was talking about?
Yeah.
That will, if you soak your airbrush in that, I'm telling you, you're not going to have an acrylic. It'll take it completely off. Where do you get that? And it's you get it at Walmart. It's usually across the aisle from all the rest of it's usually with the, it's with the kitchen cleaners. It's to clean pots and pans, but it's not with Dawn detergent. It's on the other side of the power cleaner.
So what again?
It's called Dawn Power Dissolver. It's in a blue spray bottle with the white top. That's what it used to be. And it doesn't take much. You can mix it with water, and it gets real soapy and sudsy.
Dawn,
Yeah, like it's made by Dawn.
With all the Carnex and that kind of stuff. With all the Carnex.
Yeah, you work there, don't you?
Used to.
Yeah, that's where it's at. Exactly. Now this stuff is a cleaner. Don't mix your paint with it. It's a cleaner.
Yeah.
So you clean your airbrush with it. You soak your airbrush with it. And if you do want to put it, I'll do it right now. If you do want to do like mid session, mix it up here. It's already taken that blue out. You can see how much blue. That was clear, you thought. You put the power dissolver in there, and there's some more blue right there. So it's really taking a lot of that stuff out. The most important thing about this is once you spray that, you have to follow up with water to rinse it out of your airbrush. If not, it will.
You get a sludge wash.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's like trying to wash Vallejo out of your airbrush with lacquer thinner.
Yeah.
That does not work.
Yeah.
It turns into like grits in the bottom of the airbrush.
What's that, Gunzy paint?
Yeah.
Using regular alcohol thinner with it?
Yeah.
91% is sufficient between paint colors.
Yes, that's right. That's fine. What I found using this kind of acrylic. I think the one paint that I did have some reaction with was Reaper paint. I had some reaction with Reaper paint with alcohol. I don't know what it was, but I sprayed it. I promise I did go to school in college. I sprayed some black. It might have been because it was primer with it, and I had some alcohol with it, and I didn't realize it. I just put the primer in there, squirted some alcohol, did my backwash, and I went to spray, and it was just stuck in there. So I had a reaction to it, and I never really tried to paint with Reaper again, thin with alcohol. I just thinned it with water. But most of the time, I've never had any problem with alcohol. But this.
Speaking of Reaper paint, Gabe got one that's bringing in the line of Reaper paint down there. So if any of you guys use like the flesh tones or some of the colors, they're going to let me know when they finally get it in, but they've got the racks on over for the Reaper paint line.
It only takes just a few drops of this medium, which I put a little too much in. And you can use alcohol, but with this, I just use water. It's way too heavy. A little more water. I don't know about you guys, but I could never. When I did articles for magazines and stuff, it was really hard for me to. I would get so carried away, and I'm on step 8 when I should be on step 2.
Yeah.
So if I'm skipping some areas and you got questions, it's like, hey. So I go back here, overspray this wash.
This first Saturday.
You can barely tell, but I promise you, a couple times of this. You got to be careful, a little careful with this paint because it can beat up. Sometimes it dries glossy, but most of the time it dries pretty flat. Anyway, I'll spray that, and it ties in the colors together with this wash. All you're doing is tying it in. Okay. That's about probably middle ways of what I do. Now what I do, I'm going to go in now, and now I'm going to start trying to do some detail work. And the eye sockets, under the cheek, and the wrinkles, I'm going to start trying to map out my face now. When I say map it out, I'm going to do some what they might call pre-shading. I'm going gonna do a little bit of pre-shading now, because now I'm getting to where, now I'm gonna start trying to do some highlights. There's guys that paint this way who don't do highlights and they don't do shadows. They build it up so much that it's just, at the end, they don't think they need it. I think you're painting a model. You need highlights, you need shadows. You're replicating something. It's not, I mean, this isn't real, you're trying to replicate something. So I don't care what they say, I think you need highlights and I think you need shadows. So that's what. And when I paint, it's a little uncomfortable for me right now because I paint standing up on a pod thing. I paint standing up almost. I paint everything standing up. And everything I have is level right here with me. So if I'm a little out of whack, it's because of that. I'll go in with, I had all this set up and now it's all like everywhere. Okay, I'll go in now and I'm like, okay, what am I going to use to shadow this? To start outlining this, and I'm probably going to use probably this raw umber. A lot of times I like to use a little bit of a speckled spray pattern because it kind of breaks up that hard line. It doesn't create a hard line. It kind of creates a little speckled spray pattern along with it. So I'll go down here in the areas that I think will need like darkening is underneath here, underneath his head. And I got it thin pretty much down, so it's hard to kind of tell. And I'm over exaggerating because I want you guys to be able to see it. This is really a good brush to me. It's a lot more comfortable than what was painting with. I would literally have to stop and let my hand rest for a couple minutes before I can go back. So if you got arthritis or injuries to your hand or even your arm, I would highly suggest this airbrush. I mean, on top of just being a good airbrush in general. And still at this point right here, you're not trying to be perfect. You're not trying to be really extremely exact. You're still trying to get an overall feeling of where you're going. And you would probably want to go a little bit lighter. What's going on here? And a lot of times if I mess up, I'll just use my hand and wipe it off real quick. So you want to concentrate eye sockets underneath the cheek, underneath the chin, underneath the back of the head if they're bald, like here in the chest area, crevices. Basically, you're looking to shadow all the crevices of the body underneath the muscles now. And once again, I'll open it up. Do a quick. Alcohol go here. Oops. Blend it again. A little bit. So I got a little bit of appreciating, and now I'll do a little bit of I'm getting toward the end, guys, so. Do a little bit of highlighting, go back to my base color. Don't use white, never use white to add to a color, because it will bleach it out unless that's what you want. Sometimes when I paint a Frankenstein or a zombie maybe, I might use a little white, because you might want that dead look, but in general, don't ever use white to lighten up something. It just kills the color.
Black has a similar effect in darkening.
Muddy it up. Tom's already pointed that out.
It turns it like a brown rather than darken. It doesn't darken the shade, it just turns it brown.
There for a while, the figure world, I think they're kind of getting out of it now. Went through a period where everything looked like it was highlighted with white and shadowed with black. And it just looked awful to me. But I think they're getting more and more away from that.
We'll find out in a few
We'll
days.
find out. It didn't seem to be as prevalent in Atlanta last year.
No.
All right. Highlight, shadow.
Is this the same basic thing that you're going to do in Atlanta?
Pretty much.
The class?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is pretty much, you guys are guinea pigs.
Yeah, this is kind of a treat for y'all, so you don't have to drive 8 hours to listen to it.
I'll have some handouts. I was trying to do that for you guys, but I ran out of time.
Screw us.
Screw you guys.
When is AMS?
What?
When is AMS?
Next weekend?
This coming weekend, we're leaving Friday morning. Me and Rusty and Ron are going to Atlanta.
Okay, now here's, gosh, how am I going to explain this time without sounding too If you can imagine when you're painting a figure, anything, tank, airplane, figure, doesn't matter. A halo of light over it. Boom, here it is. And this halo of light, this is not my little thing, this is something that Chet Payne, the master model painter of ever, has come up with, that he observed. If you can imagine a light over the top of your model, and the way the light cascades down on the figure or your model, the highest point is going to be your top. And as you come down, as you come down the model, every high point is going to be the highest point of that area. That's going to be your highest highlight right there. And then as you go down underneath, the highlight's going to get less and less and less until you fold down into your shadow. And your shadow is the same. The darkest is the most underneath. As you come out, you're going to start getting your highlight. And you go up, that's your highest. As you go down, it's like a wave, like this, if that makes any sense. So at the very top of this ugly dude's head, I'm going to start with some, here I am spraying my skin again. Very lightly go with some highlight color. What's good about this transparent paint, sounds really geeky. I get really excited because now I can start seeing the stuff start coming together. When I'm laying this highlight in here with this transparent paint, it's highlighting all these areas that I want to highlight, but it's not covering up. It's not covering them up. It's highlighting, accentuating what I already got underneath it. A little higher. This is where the control of the paint, the viscosity of the paint, and the pressure and stuff comes into play big time. Because this is, when you get to this point in your model, you don't want to do this. It's like, oh man, what do I do now? I have not created a barrier for it, so I'll show you what will happen now. I've taken all the work I put into it, I've taken it off. So if midway you spray a barrier on it like this, you can do that. You can dab it off real quick. And
So it seals everything below it.
Exactly. One thing you got to remember too, the saliva in your mouth is very powerful. And I've licked my finger, and even with dull coat on it, it took the dull coat off and everything off. It's a sick. So it's pretty powerful stuff. So anyway, I go and I start highlighting the raised areas. I'll try to do that. And I usually have my models propped up on a rotating, what are they called, Lazy Susans? Lazy Susans. And I usually prop it up and I'm standing up so it's eye level and I'm turning it around. If I have to, I'll put on latex gloves because I'm constantly propping my hand up, propping my airbrush up.
But what he's talking about changing mediums, going from acrylic to an enamel and back to an acrylic, I mean, that's a hard line that you cannot cross without trying. I mean, you can clean up things in the opposite way. It goes if you're painting with enamels and using acrylic barrier, like clear, and then go back to enamels, you can take the enamels off and it's probably not going to take the acrylic barrier off.
Anyway, so once I get to the, I've highlighted my areas, I usually hold it down like this and I do a halo effect. But I'm doing it from the top, like this. And I'm just kind of doing this, holding it like this right there. So I'll pass this around and you can hopefully see what I've been doing. And you can see the spot where I took the paint. Actually, it looks kind of cool. I might use that. Sometimes I find those happy accidents and I'm like, wow, that looks pretty cool. I can't replicate that, but I'll use it. Okay, real quick, I'll show you just a few other things, and I promise I'll be done.
Is the paint, or is it meant to clean the instrument out, or is it use your paint?
Hey Brent, you're not getting all kinds of speckling on the back side of your black view yard.
Creates a lot of bubbles in there, and it mixes it too, because it's not the same thing. The bubbles are kind of mixing the
You
same.
do it automatically when you change colors, because they
Yeah.
do the back color.
Do the back
Mix
color?
up. Yeah, when you put your last paint, you protect the paint on there by applying something.
Been watching that thing over there. I probably should have said something
Like the
earlier.
last, like when I'm completely done, I'll normally use
It might
Velcro
improve his though.
or other some kind of sealer on there. Yeah, I'll spray it on there and as a protective layer. Yes, sir. I do that as a protective layer. Brent has sprayed this top of this car with some paint, and he's saying if he puts some kind of protective layer over it, it kills the effect. So you kind of got to watch what you're doing. But as far as what I do, yeah, I put a protective layer on the backside because you might have to handle it, or those kind of models big, you might have to.
Does it change the finish?
Get it around to him relatively
Protective coating on it?
No, not if you've done all the steps like the protective layers. You've done protective layers and you've already sealed pins underneath. You've already sealed your pastels. Because pastels will react to dull coat and other kind of colors. You got to be real careful. That could be a whole nother kind of seminar. Pastels. But when you use pastels, you always want to spritz it. You don't want to, because when you spray those pastels, they'll either get darker or they'll disappear or they'll get too light. It depends on the brand of pastel. I use a pastel that's already, it's like a woman's compact makeup. It's already ground. It's actual pink pigment that's been ground up. It's the pure pigment that's been ground up, and they're very, very powerful. And when you put them on, they stay on. And when you spray dull coat on them, those tend to not get darker or anything. They tend to just stay the color that they are.
What was that Dawn product again? What was it called?
It's called Power Dissolver.
Tom, will you go help that thing around the corner?
Okay. Dawn Power Dissolver. It's in a blue bottle, blue spray bottle.
Okay.
You want to mix it 50-50 with water.
And we can use that to clean and soak your.
Clean and soak your airbrush. The most important thing is to make sure you rinse it off with water and thoroughly rinse your airbrush off with water before you start painting. Because I did have it, like I said, not so much react, but strip the pigment completely down and start trying to paint it. this brush? This is called the Grex airbrush. They sell it here at Hot Wheels. Grex, G-R-E-X, Grex. You can come over here and use it if you want. You can go over here and play with it. You can play with this Iwata too. You can see the difference. By any means, I'm not putting down Iwata, so you guys don't think I'm doing that. Okay, so now that I've got it pretty much done, I've gone and I've done some shading and highlighting. I'll go in now with, this is when I start using my paint brushes. And I'll go in and I'll start detailing the wrinkles, doing some spot washes on the wrinkles and some raised areas. I might do a little bit of dry brushing, a little bit of light, transparent sponging in some areas. Very light, because you don't want to cover it, but you've done it. You just want to accent. What some people do, what I've done a lot, is I go in with a wash or a stain. And I'll go in with the paintbrush, and I haven't sealed it with gel coat, so I'm not going to do it because if I wipe it off, it'll wipe everything. This is more of a wash that you guys, filter, wash, whatever you guys call it. And on the back here, kind of go in and you lay it down. And what I would normally do is I would go in with a rag and I would not dab it off. I would go, how am I explain it? The opposite direction that the detail is going. Because if you go the other direction, you're going to sweep it up off the detail and carry it with it. So most of the detail is coming up and it's kind of juting out this way. So I will kind of wipe it down this way, so it stays in the crevices, if that makes any sense. Or you don't have to wipe it off if you want this kind of effect. I kind of like what's going on with this, so I will kind of like leave it here. And a lot of times I won't wash or glaze the whole thing. I'll just do it in certain areas. Like I might want underneath here, like to be this kind of diseased, oozing kind of area. So I'll just spot wash that area right there and just kind of leave it that. But some guys use this straight out of the bottle and they glaze it on top and they let it sit for a few seconds and they get it and then wipe it off. But you got to watch that because that will definitely create a filter that will definitely change the whole aspect of your model. Washes in general are safer to do. Glazing, you got to know exactly why you want to glaze it. Most guys glaze when they paint this kind of stuff when they're painting dinosaurs or lizards or some real scaly kind of creature, because you do want that contrasted look to the scales. This stuff, it dries pretty fast with a hair dryer. I'll go ahead and pass that around. You can see where it's kind of gone in there in a really detailed area. You don't, I mean, if you want, you can glaze with black, but that's one of those that is the most powerful color out there, black. And you gotta realize when you glaze black, it's gonna look too harsh. You guys ever used silly putty? Some guys who want to create effects. Since I don't have my model, I'll use Ron's. I'm just kidding. You can thin it out as thin as you want, and I'll use my hand. And say you want some weird looking effects on the top of his head. You can spread that out on his head. Say that's the top of his head. This isn't real thin. And you can get a paintbrush or something sharp, and you can dig out some areas in there like this. And just kind of make them, it's kind of weird shaped. Press them back down. Some guys who want to replicate some amphibian skin, and they're not real comfortable with their airbrush yet, this is a perfect way to create those soft spots. I did it on the wrong hand, now I use my left hand. That's awesome. One of my favorite colors that I don't know if I brought, which usually when people see my work, they're like, "That's Rusty's work," because I use smoke almost all the time, in one way, shape, or form with my models. Some people tell me that I use it too much, which I may do, but I love the color smoke. I did this to my son and his friend. I painted them up for Halloween. One of his friends wanted to be this. I did some prosthetic makeups on him. I made him kind of look like a frog, and I put this silly putty on him, and I gave him some frog spots. Hopefully this turns out. As you can see on my skin, it just leaves the spots on my skin and everything else, and it didn't make a real harsh line. It kind of makes it organic. And what you can do too is after you spray that, you can real quick get some alcohol and spray it on there real quick, and it'll feather it out even more. I think that's about it. You guys have any questions? Any more questions? Any ask? You can come over here and you can play with the airbrush, play with the paint. I have no problem with that. Q-tips. When I clean my airbrush, usually throughout my airbrush session, I'll spray some in here like this. And I'll get my Q-tip and I'll just roll it around in there, circle it around. And then I'll try to spray all that residue out. Ooh, just got to whip it out right. Wild turkey's the best. So anyway, with the Grex, I found out you got to be careful if you get one. You can pull all the way back, and even though you have this protective cap in there, if you jam a Q-tip in there to clean, you're going to bend your needle. Because that needle, as far as I know, I may be doing something wrong, doesn't set all the way completely back.
I did that. That's how I did mine.
Exactly. And that's just something I found out, because with my water, they go all the way back in, and you can just jam a Q-tip up in there and clean all that up in there, and get all that out, and the needle comes back. But what the water does, which what this one doesn't do, paint will collect beyond this point in the water. I haven't found this to happen with the Grex.
That needle and the water will stick hard if you let it dry, because it collects right behind the cuff on it, and you'll get in there and you have to get a pair of vice grips to get the needle out of it.
And I have not found, and what I like about this too is sometimes on a sticky needle or a sticky piston in there, I mean, you're having to do this. With this Grex, you got leverage here. And even though you may get a sticky piston, which I did get in because I let the paint dry, I was able to break it free faster.
You guys are wondering about direction here in the full line here.
Why'd you steal my thunder?
I bent the needle in mine the very first time I used it. Probably doing the same thing. I was like, it's got some junk in there. Took a Q-tip, stuck it in there, and bent the needle on it.
Yeah.
And those are matched. The needle and the heads are matched. You can't buy one or the other. You have to get them both. So try and not bend your needles.
Yeah. But the good thing about them is I used a Wada Micron for a good while for my fine detail work. That's the most temperamental Now they're good airbrushes, believe me. I'm not down them. They're very expensive, and the parts are very expensive, and they're real temperamental. This right here, I can get just as fine line with this if I could with the micro, and it's not near as temperamental. Like I said, Iwatas are good brushes. I just like the Grex better. To me, Grex is it conduces more to what I have to deal with now.
You like the pistol grip?
I do like the pistol grip. Like I said, first at the show, I passed by the booth, and I was looking, and I was like, man, pistol grip stuff. Because I used pistol grip when I painted cars before, like real cars, you know, that pistol grip, and I was like, that's just like a spray can. When I went over there and I actually used it, and I actually felt the smoothness of it, where you can pull back, there's a little bit of give, air, pull back, paint. I'm like, wow, that's simple. And then when I seen Josh's daughter painting with this, I was like, what? A teenager get in there and start painting with this and writing her name with it and everything. And then like a 9-year-old came in, he was doing that. And I was like, wow, I gotta try that. So I went and tried it and started drawing an eye and all that kind of stuff.
It's the leverage on that longer leverage.
Yeah.
That gives you this much better control.
Now the Grex rep saw me at Wonderfest. I wasn't using the Grex, I was using Iwata, and I started painting the face. And I was kind of having a little bit of a problem with the Iwata because the paint was coagulating. So he was like, I'd like to see what you could do with this. And I couldn't draw a face at the show because I started show painting and running around. But anyway, one last thing. These little brushes here, I'm sure you guys know about them. These are wonderful. Well, they're not pipe cleaners, they're
welding tip cleaner.
Are they? Yeah, that's what we got.
Yeah, they're for cleaning welding tips.
Yeah.
Harbor Freight.
Harbor Freight. They're just really good. They're different sizes, and you can get up in the nose. These even clean the tip, the very, very tips of those cones of water, how they just really tiny. You can get the tiniest one here, and you can actually go in the back end of it, and you can actually clean that tip out with this one here.
I don't think you can on that one. It's too small.
This one's a little too small for that, but I still use those exclusively because.
But yeah, they're well for the welding system.
So and when you use transparent colors from different companies, if you ever let Freakflex dry in your paintbrush, you will hate yourself because this puts a protective coating. It's like an eggshell, but it is no match for the Power Dissolver. It really isn't because over time it'll even take that off. One last thing, and I promise I'm done. This is I got this from a guy named Bubba. He used to sell airbrushes and stuff. This is snake oil airbrush lube. You don't have to use this. They sell it. After you're done with airbrushing and you clean your airbrush and everything, I would always suggest you put a little bit on the crease of your finger, roll your needle on it, and then put your airbrush in there. It will save you a lot of headache from that needle stick that I always get. And that concludes the session. So, like I said, if you want to come up here and stay around, go ahead.
Well, thank you guys for giving Rusty your undivided attention.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Give him my hand. That was a good one.